What do you do when your own son tells you that you're no longer needed in the business you built with your bare hands? How do you respond when he quietly moves every asset into his name, assuming you're too old, too tired, and too confused to notice? This is how I stayed calm, disappeared without a fight, and let the systems he trusted teach him a lesson I never could. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Mark, and by the time my son told me I was no longer needed in my own company, I had already spent more years inside that building than he had spent on this earth. I built our construction supply business one delivery and one unpaid weekend at a time. When I first rented a small warehouse with peeling paint and a leaking roof, nobody believed it would last more than a year. There were days when I worried they might be right. I worked through sickness, through winter, through long power cuts, always telling myself that it did not matter how tired I felt, because I was building something solid for my family and for my son. That thought kept me moving when my back hurt and my hands shook from lifting bags of cement. My typical morning had followed the same shape for many years. I arrived at the warehouse before most of the younger staff, still carrying the same old thermos Anna bought me when Ethan started school. I liked to walk the yard slowly, greeting the drivers, checking the trucks, listening to the sound of forklifts moving pallets. The smell of dust, diesel, and wet concrete felt like a strange kind of home. Workers nodded, called me boss, and we talked briefly about deliveries, delays, or broken tools. I knew which driver had a sick mother, which loader's child needed new shoes, and which foreman was saving for a car. These details mattered to me, even if they did not appear in any official report. Inside, the open-plan office felt different. Over the years, computer screens multiplied, big monitors appeared on the walls, and long tables replaced single desks. Ethan said that this open space helped everyone feel like a team. To me, it always felt like noise. Young employees in tight shirts and perfect hair tapped on laptops and spoke about metrics, funnels, and campaigns. They often walked right past me with a quick nod, then lit up when Ethan entered behind me 20 seconds later. I did not blame them. I knew how it looked. To them, I was just an older man with slow steps and worn shoes, while my son was the modern boss with a sharp suit and a faster voice. Ethan liked to arrive with a rush. He moved through the office with a kind of performance, greeting people loudly, joking about clients, checking his watch. Behind him, Lena sometimes appeared, as if they were a package deal. She did not work for the company officially, but she liked to visit during the day. She walked across the office like she owned the place, talking with marketing staff about colors and pictures and online presence. I watched from a distance more and more, standing near the coffee machine with my tea, feeling the business slowly adjust its center of gravity around them instead of me. On the morning that changed everything, I felt more tired than usual. I had not slept well. There was a strange weight in my chest that I could not shake off. I still did the same routine. I walked the yard. I checked that a truck door closed properly. I spoke with a supplier on the phone about a late shipment. When I entered the office, Lena, our operations manager, looked up from her screen with a careful expression that I did not like. She said that Ethan wanted to see me in the small conference room, the one with the glass door and uncomfortable chairs. Her voice was too neutral. It was the tone people use when they know something is not good, but do not want to say it out loud. I went there at once. Ethan and Lena were already seated on one side of the table, with a laptop open in front of them. My chair was on the other side, alone. On the screen, there were graphs and lines in bright colors. I sat down slowly and waited. Ethan began to speak in a calm, almost rehearsed way. He told me that the company had grown, that responsibilities had increased, that risks were higher than when I started with one rented shed. He used words like compliance, liability, and investor confidence. I listened without interrupting, counting his buzzwords in my head to stay calm. He then said that, according to advice from some people he trusted, it was time to separate me from direct control over the business. He explained that, as an older founder with what he called unpredictable health and old-fashioned methods, I made some partners nervous on paper. He said that his wife did not feel safe with me signing large deals because she believed I was too trusting. He added that banks and potential investors felt more comfortable when everything was in the hands of one active manager, which he believed should be him. He presented this as a professional decision, not a personal attack, but every word landed like a quiet slap. Lena joined in, speaking in a smooth voice. She said that she did not doubt my love for the company, but that she had seen too many stories of older owners making emotional decisions at the wrong moment. She claimed that the modern world was dangerous, that one wrong signature or one handshake with the wrong person could destroy everything Ethan was building. She said that she had trouble sleeping at night. knowing that I still had authority to sign contracts and make promises. The implication was clear. In her mind, my presence was a hole in the bottom of their shiny new boat. Ethan then switched to a softer tone. He told me he wanted me to stay as an honorary founder, to come by when I wanted, to walk the yard and greet the workers, but not to sign anything, not to interfere with decisions, not to appear in serious meetings. He said that he would handle all documents, all accounts, all assets. He told me that this was for my own good, to protect me from stress and future problems. He said that he and Lena would take responsibility now, that it was time for the new generation to carry the load. In that moment, I felt something inside me shrink and then harden. For years, I had told myself that one day Ethan would naturally take over, that I would hand him the keys with pride. I imagined us standing together in the yard, me older but still respected, him younger but still grateful. Instead, I was sitting across from my son and his wife as they told me that I was a risk and a problem. They did not ask how I felt. They presented a decision as if it had already been made by some invisible counsel. I looked at the table and felt the surface under my hands, smooth and cold. I did not raise my voice. I asked only one question. I wanted to know what this meant in practice. Ethan answered with a long explanation that did not say much. He said internal permissions would change, that bank access would be centralized under his credentials, that he would be the only one to sign large agreements and approve big payments. He mentioned that it would be easier if most assets and registrations were under his name or under entities he controlled. He mentioned future legal cleanup, future transfers, future optimizations. I understood enough to know that he was talking about moving things I had built into his hands and leaving me with a plaque on the wall. The meeting ended without shouting, without slammed doors. Ethan stood up, walked out to take a call, and Lena tapped on her laptop as if adjusting a calendar. I sat alone in that small room for a while, listening to the muffled noise of the office through the glass door. When I finally stepped back into the open space, most screens were already glowing with new emails. People avoided looking at me directly. Only Elena met my eyes. She did not say anything, but there was a soft apology in her face, the kind that says she knew this had been planned and could not stop it. I went back to my corner office, the one with glass walls facing the yard. It had been my pride once. I liked to sit there and watch trucks come and go, like a captain watching ships from a harbor window. Now it felt like a display case in a museum. There was nothing urgent on my desk, no stack of contracts, no notes, no calls waiting. Someone had already removed my access to some systems. When I tried to open certain files on the computer, an error message appeared about permissions. I sat back in my chair and looked at the photo on the shelf of Ethan as a child, holding a toy truck in the yard, smiling at me like I was the whole world. I wondered when exactly that boy turned into the man who saw me as a risk report. Later that evening, as I was leaving, I walked past the open door of the new shared space Ethan liked to use for private calls. I heard his voice before I saw him. He was on the phone, pacing, speaking in that confident tone he used with bankers and advisors. He did not see me standing in the corridor. He told the person on the line that our restructuring was almost complete, that soon every important asset would be in his name, that there would be no more surprises from the older generation. He said that once the transfers were finished, they would finally be safe. He laughed and added that if anything went wrong, at least there would be no confusion about who owned what. I stood there, half hidden by the doorframe, listening to my son describe my life's work as something he would soon hold alone. I did not step inside or interrupt him. Instead, I turned away and walked slowly down the corridor, feeling each step like it belonged to someone else. The warehouse lights were dimming as I passed the windows. Forklifts were parked in their spots, trucks stood lined up like tired animals. In my pocket, my old phone buzzed with a message from Anna asking if I would be home for dinner. I looked back once at the building and felt a strange emptiness, like the moment when a worker finishes packing a pallet and knows that sooner or later, someone else will pick it up and drive it away. When I left the office that evening, I walked slower than usual because I knew if I rushed home, Anna would see too much on my face. At my age, you learn that sometimes the only weapon you have left is silence, at least until you understand what kind of war you are in. On the bus, I watched people scroll on their phones, laugh at videos, complain about traffic. Nobody there knew that a man who had spent his life building something had just been told, in very polite words, that he was now a risk to everything he created. I went home, climbed the stairs, and stopped at our door for a second to breathe. Then I walked in and tried to act like any other tired husband coming back from a long day. Anna immediately felt something was off. She always did. She asked how my day went, but not in the casual way. Her eyes stayed on my face too long. I told her that things were changing at the company, that Ethan wanted to take more responsibility, that this was normal, and that I was just tired. I tried to make it sound like a good thing, like a peaceful transfer of power. She listened, but I could see that her hands moved faster over the table, wiping the same spot 3 times. She asked if there had been any argument. I said there had been a meeting, not a fight, and that he and Lena believed it was safer if I stepped back. When I mentioned Lena's name, Anna's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. That night, as we sat in our small kitchen with tea and bread, my mind walked backwards. I thought about the early years when there was no company, no big warehouse, no open-plan office, just me, a rented garage, a second-hand truck, and a head full of fears. Back then, Ethan was a child who used to sit on my lap and play with a broken tape measure while I filled out invoices by hand. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with peeling wallpaper. Anna worked in a sewing shop and brought home envelopes with cash and thread stuck inside. When I decided to start buying and reselling construction materials, she did not laugh. She only asked how much sleep I would lose and what we needed to cut from our already thin budget. The first warehouse I rented had holes in the roof. When it rained, we had to move bags of cement and rolls of insulation to dry corners so they would not be ruined. I drove the truck myself, loaded and unloaded it myself, made deliveries, wrote invoices, begged clients to pay on time. Ethan used to help me in his own small way. When he was 5, he painted crooked little trucks on old cardboard and said he was making a logo for us. When he was 10, he learned the names of different materials before some of my workers did. He used to tell people that his father owned a big company, even though at that time we only had 2 workers and 1 truck that broke down every second month. As Ethan grew up, the world around us changed faster than I did. Computers appeared on desks, phones became small screens, everything moved online. I was slow with these things, but I tried. Ethan learned computers quickly at school, and soon he was explaining to me how to send emails, how to open spreadsheets, how to use basic software. I was proud when he talked about marketing and business strategy. I thought he would become a strong partner, mixing my ground knowledge with his modern ideas. I always imagined us standing side by side like 2 pillars holding the same roof. To pay for his studies, we took a big loan. The bank looked at my records, my warehouse, my truck, my contracts, and finally said yes, but they wanted strong guarantees. I signed my name on several lines I did not fully like, using our apartment as security. Anna did not sleep well for weeks, but she still told Ethan to study hard and not worry about us. He chose business and management. I thought it was perfect. He would learn the language of numbers and laws that I always respected but never fully understood, and then bring that knowledge back to strengthen what we had built. When he finished university and came into the company, there was a real golden period for a while. He improved our branding, rebuilt our website, brought in new clients with online campaigns. He moved us from notebooks to proper systems. I watched him talk with confidence to people in suits, and I felt a mix of pride and relief. I started to believe that maybe I could finally sleep more, maybe even take Sundays off sometimes. When he suggested hiring more young staff, I agreed. When he talked about opening a second warehouse, I supported him. I still kept control of the building and the main credit relationships, but I let him lead many daily operations. Then he met Lena. At first, I tried hard to like her. She was pretty, clever, always dressed like she was going to some important event, even when she came to the warehouse. She worked in social media and spoke about influencers and campaigns and impressions. She praised Ethan in front of everyone, saying he was a visionary, saying he was too talented for a small local operation. She calling our business a good base for his real future. I laughed politely, but the words scratched something inside me. Small things changed after she arrived. The company Instagram page filled with photos of Ethan and Lena in hard hats, pretending to inspect materials for the camera. My face appeared less often on the website. Once, I heard Lena tell someone that the company was basically their project now, that Ethan had taken it to the next level. When she said their, she did not mean me and my son, she meant her and my son. At family dinners, she spoke a lot about risk, about old people who lost everything because they trusted the wrong partners, about founders who destroyed their own companies by refusing to let go. She looked at me when she said these things, but always with a sweet little smile, as if she was just sharing stories, not hinting at anything. We had a dinner at a trendy restaurant once, the kind of place where plates are big and the food in the middle is small. Ethan invited some friends from his circle, young professionals in nice jackets with watches that cost as much as my first truck. Anna and I came in our usual simple clothes. I felt like a worker who had accidentally walked into the boardroom. During the dinner, Ethan told the story of the company. I listened carefully. In his version, the early years sounded more chaotic, less deliberate, almost like luck. The real growth, according to him, started when he came back from university and fixed the structure. He said I had done my best, but implied that he had turned a family shop into a real business. The table laughed. Someone asked when I would retire. Ethan said that, in practice, I was already semi-retired because he handled everything that mattered. Anna kept glancing at me, but I pretended not to be bothered. I smiled, raised my glass, played the part of the proud old father. It was easier than making a scene. After dinner, on the way home, she finally spoke. She said quietly that she did not like the way Ethan had told the story. She said it sounded like he had pushed us to the side in his own mind already. She asked if I had noticed how Lena had barely talked to us, except to mention modernizing the brand and cleaning up old habits. I told her that young people had their own style, that it did not mean they respected us less. Even as I said those words, I knew I was saying them more to calm her than because I believed them. Over the next months, Ethan's attitude slowly shifted from partnership to management. He started calling me old school in meetings, half joking, half serious. He would correct me in front of staff when I used a paper note instead of an app, telling everyone that we needed to move into the real world. When decisions had to be made, he often informed me after they were already taken. If I suggested a different approach, he would say that the data did not support my view. Lena sometimes came into those conversations and repeated that the market trusted people like Ethan more than people like me. She said investors feel calmer when they see one clear leader, not an emotional founder holding on. I tolerated many small cuts because I still told myself that this was his way of trying to protect us. I thought maybe he was afraid I would work myself into a heart attack. I thought maybe Lena was just nervous about money and wanted stability. I tried to see their behavior as clumsy love, not disrespect. But each joke about me being outdated, each story where I became a side character, each decision made without asking me, pushed that explanation further away. The real shift came one evening in our kitchen. Anna and I were eating soup when she told me that Ethan had called her during the day. He had asked how I was sleeping, if I was forgetting things, if I had trouble with stairs. She said his questions sounded less like concern and more like an interview. She asked him why he wanted to know. He answered that he was planning ahead and needed to understand what support we would need. When she told me this, her hands shook. She said that for the first time, she felt like he was not just thinking of our comfort, but of how to manage us. She asked me straight if the company and the apartment were already in Ethan's name. I told her no, they were not. She looked relieved for a moment and then afraid again, like someone standing on a bridge made of old wood. A few days later, the restaurant scene repeated in a lighter version. We were at Ethan and Lena's apartment for a small gathering. Their friends were there again, laughing loudly, drinking wine with names I could not pronounce. The topic turned to parents, to inheritance, to responsibility. One of Ethan's friends joked that parents are like old buildings, expensive to maintain and impossible to move. The table laughed. Ethan laughed too. He said that sooner or later, you have to choose between investing in your future or pouring money into the past. He added that some people were lucky because their parents had assets to transfer, but unlucky because those same parents did not know when to step aside. Someone looked at me and asked, still joking, if I was ready to hand over the keys. Before I could answer, Ethan said that in practice he already ran everything, that I was mostly the face on the wall. There was laughter. Only one guest, a quiet man at the end of the table, glanced at me with an expression I recognized, a mix of pity and discomfort. On the way home, Anna did not talk at first. When we reached our building, she stopped on the stairs and asked me in a tired voice what would happen to us if Ethan ever decided he truly did not need us at all, not as workers, not as parents, not even as symbolic figures. I had always had an answer for everything. That time, I did not. The week after that dinner felt like a slow slide on ice. I kept going through the motions because I did not know what else to do. When you have built your whole life around one place, you do not just stop going there because someone has decided you are no longer needed. So I still woke up, put on my work clothes, drank my tea, and took the bus. But each morning now, as I walked toward the warehouse, I had the same question in my head that Anna had asked on the stairs. What happens to us if our own son decides we are nothing but weight? From the outside, nothing looked different. Trucks still lined up, men still shouted instructions, forklifts still beeped when backing up. But small details were not the same. Some of the new vans had fresh logos with a slightly changed font. Something Lena said looked more premium. A few younger workers glanced at me, then quickly back at their phones, as if unsure whether to say hello. I greeted them anyway. Routine gave me something to hold on to. Inside, the open plan office felt colder than usual. The company chat on one of the big screens showed new project channels with names I had never seen. My own name disappeared from some of the group conversations. It was a strange thing, watching yourself become invisible somewhere you used to be the center. Lena walked up to me with a tight smile and asked if we could talk for a moment. Her voice had that careful softness again, the one from the day Ethan called me to the conference room. We stepped into a quiet corner near the storage cabinets. She looked around before speaking, like a person about to share bad news in a hospital hallway. She told me that she had been instructed to update internal records. Fleet vehicles, equipment, some supplier accounts, even software licenses had been moved for efficiency under a separate entity where Ethan was the sole director. She said it in a neutral tone, but her eyes would not meet mine. I asked if this was normal practice. She replied that people did things like this sometimes, yes, but usually after a proper discussion with all owners. I felt my face heat, but I kept my voice calm. I asked if my own access had changed. Lena hesitated, then admitted that my login rights had been reduced. I could still see general reports, but some financial dashboards, banking links, and approval panels now showed insufficient permissions when used with my account. She had not done this herself. The IT guy, on Ethan's request, had handled it. She told me she thought I should know because she did not feel good watching it happen in silence. I thanked her. She looked relieved and sad at the same time. I went to my glass office and tested it myself. I opened the internal banking shortcut. A message popped up saying my access was blocked and advising me to contact the administrator. I tried to enter the section where we approved large payments. The system told me I did not have rights. One by one, I clicked on familiar tools and watched doors close on the screen. The only things I could still see were basic sales reports, warehouse stock lists, and simple summaries. It was like being allowed to walk through the yard, but not to open any doors. Before lunch, I asked Ethan if we could talk. He told me to come to his office, the space that used to be mine before I moved to the corner with the glass walls. Now it was full of new furniture, a large screen on the wall, and a board with sticky notes in bright colors. Lena sat at one side, tapping on her phone. Ethan gestured to a chair, but he did not close the door. That told me he did not expect a real argument. I told him calmly that Lena had informed me about changes in registrations and access. I said I wanted to understand what was going on, not as his father, but as the person who had founded the company. He smiled like a doctor explaining a simple procedure to a nervous patient. He said this was all standard practice for companies our size, just housekeeping. He talked about tax optimization, centralizing control, protecting the brand from fragmented decision-making. He explained how moving vehicles and certain assets into a separate entity made it easier for investors to see a clear structure, how banks liked one main decision-maker. He used phrases like clean cap table and transparent governance. The more he spoke, the less he looked like my son, and the more he looked like one of those consultants who only visit to draw diagrams and send big invoices. I asked why my access to systems had been cut without even a conversation. He said it was to avoid confusion and duplicate instructions. He reminded me of the insurance argument, said that if something happened to me and I still had broad authority in the systems, it could complicate things. He said he was simply doing what any responsible modern manager would do. Then he added something that stayed in my head. He said he could not act properly if I insisted on holding on to symbolic power that did not match my actual involvement. Then he brought up Lena again. He said she did not trust my way of doing things, that she worried I might sign something out of kindness that would hurt us later. He said she had seen it in other families, where the father signed a guarantee for some friend and lost everything. He said he promised her that he would not let that happen, and that moving control to himself was part of that promise. The way he said it, my life's work sounded like a wedding gift he was rearranging to suit his wife's taste. At the end of the talk, Ethan suggested that, to avoid future complications, we should consider formalizing everything. He mentioned power of attorney, transferring any remaining directorships, simplifying ownership structures. He said it would be better if, on paper, everything pointed to him, so that banks and partners would always know who to call. He said I could keep my honorary status, maybe a small pension, and the freedom to come and go. It was the first time he used the word pension in relation to me. It landed with the weight of a stone. I looked at him across the desk and realized something simple and sharp. For him, this was not about protection. It was about control. He wanted clear lines where he sat at the top, legally, visually, and practically. I had always taught him that a man should stand on his own feet. Now I saw that he had decided the best way to stand tall was to stand on my shoulders while pushing my head down. I listened until he finished. Then I told him that any important formal change would require a review by my lawyer, Mr. Novak. I said it in a flat voice. He frowned slightly. He said Novak was from another era, that modern firms did things differently. He said his colleagues had their own legal contacts who understood current practice better. I repeated that any paper I signed would go through Novak's hands first. I did not raise my tone. I did not threaten or beg. I just stated a line. Ethan sighed and said we could talk about it later. He closed his laptop to show the meeting was over. That evening, at home, Anna watched me closely while she cut bread. I told her more, this time without smoothing the edges. I explained how access had changed, how assets had been moved into Ethan's new entity, how he wanted powers signed over. Her face drained of color. She asked if he had already put everything into his name. I said I did not know the full picture yet, but I knew enough to be worried. I told her that, as far as I understood, the building and some deeper rights were still under structures Novak had set up long ago. I said we needed to talk to Novak. Anna nodded slowly. She said she had never liked lawyers or banks, but for the first time in her life, she was glad we had someone like Novak on our side. She asked if Ethan knew about the exact structure. I told her that Ethan knew the general story but had never been interested in the details. He always waved his hand when I tried to explain how the company and the building were arranged. He trusted that paper people would handle it. He believed that because he ran the Daily Show, fate would naturally put the crown on his head. The next morning, I called Novak's office and asked if he had time to see me. His assistant told me he could fit me in that afternoon. I left the warehouse early without telling Ethan. I told Lena I had personal business and that I would be reachable by phone. On the way to Novak's office, my stomach felt heavy. I had known this man for decades, but I still did not enjoy talking about legal things. Numbers and official phrases always made me feel like I was walking on thin ice over deep water. Novak's office was in an older building near the city center. The staircase smelled of dust and old paper. Inside, his waiting room had the same worn chairs and faded magazines it had always had. When he called me in, he looked the same as ever. Gray hair, calm eyes, a suit that was never too new but always clean and pressed. He shook my hand, asked about Anna, asked about my health. Only then did he ask what brought me in. I told him everything. I spoke slowly, trying not to drown him in emotion. I described Ethan's push to move assets, the changes in system access, the talk about power of attorney and control. I explained what Lena had seen in the records. When I finished, Novak leaned back and was quiet for a moment. Then he asked a few precise questions, the kind that land directly on the heart of things. He asked if I had signed anything giving Ethan full authority. I said no. He asked if any new documents had changed the holding company that owns the building. I said not that I knew of. He asked if we had altered my guarantees with the bank. I said we had not touched them since he last arranged them years ago. Novak nodded slowly. He opened a drawer and took out a familiar, slightly thick folder with the company name on the side. He did not open it on the table yet. He only rested his hand on it. He reminded me of the structure we had set up when the company began to grow. The operating business, where Ethan played, was one thing. The building and main rights were under a separate holding company, fully in my name at the time. My personal guarantees supported the bank credit lines. Key client relationships, like Kral Group, were based on contracts that listed me directly, not just the company. He told me, in simple words, that what Ethan had done so far sounded like surface work, changing registrations of vehicles, moving small equipment, updating logins, even shifting some accounts into his name. None of that automatically touched the deeper roots that actually feed the tree. Those roots were still tied to my name, to that holding company, to guarantees that only I could give or remove. I felt something in my chest loosen that I had not even realized was clenched. I was hurt, yes. I was angry, yes. But I was not as powerless as I had feared. Novak did not tell me what to do. He said it was my decision how far I wanted to go. He only reminded me that as long as my mind was clear and my signature was mine, nobody could legally erase me by just moving visible parts around. When our talk was over, I stood up to leave. As I turned to the door, my eyes drifted to a shelf behind his desk. There, among other files, I saw that thick folder again with our company's name on the spine, and, in smaller letters, the words holding, guarantees, liens. As I looked at it, I heard a soft sound from Novak's computer, a calendar reminder popping up on his screen. He glanced at it, then at me, and said calmly that perhaps it was time we also talked to the bank soon, just in case. When I left Novak's office that afternoon, the city felt a little different, like someone had turned down the volume on everything except my own thoughts. Cars still moved, people still hurried, but I walked slower, letting each step land with more weight. I knew more now than when I had entered that building. I knew that Ethan's moves were not as complete as he believed, that the deeper roots still ran through my name, my guarantees, and our old arrangements. Knowing that did not erase the hurt, but it changed the shape of my fear. I was not standing over an empty hole. There was still ground under my feet. On the tram home, I looked out of the window and saw the city the way I had seen it 20, 30 years ago, when everything felt like a risk and a promise at the same time. I thought about all the times I had walked into banks with sweaty hands, into meetings with bigger companies that could crush us if they wanted. Back then, I had no one to lean on. Now technically, I had a son in a sharp suit, and yet I felt more alone than before. At least in those days, my enemies were outside the house. At home, Anna noticed the tiredness in my shoulders before I even took off my shoes. She asked how the meeting had gone, if Novak had confirmed our fears or calmed them. I sat at the kitchen table and told her the truth, as far as it went. I said that Ethan had moved things, yes, but that the important parts were still under structures Novak had built for us long ago. I explained in simple words that the building, some rights, and the main bank guarantees were still tied to me, not to our son. I told her that we had options. She listened with her hands around a warm mug, not drinking. At first she looked relieved, then confused, then sad. She asked if I planned to use those options to fight Ethan. I said I was not sure yet. I admitted that the idea of dragging my own son through courts or public fights made my stomach turn. I told her that what I wanted most was not revenge, but peace and dignity. I did not need to punish him. I just did not want to be used by him. She nodded slowly and said that she would stand where I stood, but that whatever I chose, she did not want to live under anyone's mercy, not even our child's. The next few days at the company passed with strange politeness. Ethan acted as if nothing important had happened. He moved through the office with his usual energy, giving instructions, praising numbers, joking with staff. If anything, he seemed lighter, as if putting me in the honorary founder box had cleared his mind. Lena came in twice that week with her laptop and sat with the marketing team, planning campaigns. Once I walked past and heard my name mentioned in a quick, vague way as part of the story of the brand. It sounded like I was already part of the past tense. I did not confront him again. Instead, I watched and listened. I noticed how he talked about his company in calls, how he told suppliers that he owned everything now in practice, how he complained to a friend in the corridor that he was tired of managing 2 generations at once. I saw Lena grow more distant, like a person trying not to get caught in the echo of someone else's decisions. I also noticed that some older clients still asked for me specifically, and that when I was in the yard, drivers and foremen came to me first, out of habit, not because of a title on paper. One morning, I called the main bank and asked if I could schedule a brief meeting with our relationship manager, Mr. Marek. I said I wanted to talk about my personal situation and some general questions about guarantees. The assistant set a time for later in the week. I did not tell Ethan. On the day of the meeting, I left the warehouse after saying I had errands. It was not a full lie. The bank felt like an errand, but also like walking into a room where future explosions might be decided. The bank's lobby was bright and cold, with polished floors and the soft hum of machines. They led me to a small private meeting room with a glass wall and a low table. Mr. Marek came in with a tablet and a polite smile. He was a quiet man with careful eyes, the kind of person who always looks like he is listening more than he speaks. He asked how business was, how my health was, and then waited for me to explain why I had come. I told him I wanted to understand, in simple terms, what my personal guarantees meant today. I said that I knew we had credit lines supported by those guarantees, and that I wanted to know what would happen if I ever decided not to continue them. I did not mention Ethan directly. I spoke as if I were an old owner planning retirement, nothing more. Marek did not seem surprised. He explained in neutral language that the bank had given credit based partly on my record and my guarantees. He said that if I withdrew them, the bank would have to review the risk, maybe adjust terms, maybe freeze or reduce lines until new guarantees or securities were in place. He was careful not to advise any specific course, just stating rules. I asked if the bank would automatically transfer guarantees to my son if he now ran the company. Marek shook his head. He said guarantees were personal. A transfer would require new contracts, new evaluations, new signatures. The bank did not assume that children automatically stepped into parents' shoes. I thanked him. I did not say more. I did not show him anger or fear. I left that room knowing one clear thing. Ethan could move registrations and toys, but without my signature, the bank would never quietly treat him as the same support. On my way out of the bank, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan, asking if I could check a small detail about a client's old order. There was nothing urgent in his tone. He assumed I was somewhere near the warehouse, doing nothing of consequence. I wrote back that I would handle it later. It was a small answer, but inside it I felt something shifting. For the first time, I knew something important he did not know, and I did not rush to share it. A day later, I visited one of our biggest clients, Kral Group. On paper, they were just another company. In reality, they had been with us since the early days, placing orders when we were still nobody. The owner's daughter, now running much of the operation, had known me since she was a teenager. I went there under the excuse of a normal check-in. Ethan did not object. He probably saw it as a harmless old man habit. In their office, Ms. Kral greeted me warmly. She asked how Anna was, how my back was, how the yard looked. We talked about orders, delivery times, small problems. After a while, I carefully moved the conversation in a different direction. I asked her, as if joking, what she would do if I ever decided to stop working completely. I asked if she would trust the company the same way if I disappeared and Ethan alone ran things. She did not laugh. She looked at me for a long moment before answering. She said that she appreciated what Ethan had done with systems and prices, but that her trust in us came from history, not spreadsheets. She remembered delays where I personally showed up with a truck late at night. She remembered mistakes that I corrected at my own cost. She said loyalty was not to logos, but to people. Then she added that if I ever started something smaller, quieter, but with the same honesty, she would seriously consider following, as long as the numbers made sense. She did not promise anything. She did not need to. The message was clear enough. When I left their building, the air outside felt lighter. I did not have a plan yet, but I had 3 facts: Novak's file, Marek's explanation, and Kral's loyalty. Together, they formed something solid in my head, like the foundation of a house you can build on if you choose. I realized that I no longer wanted to test how far Ethan would go. I had already seen enough. The question now was not whether he would push us out, but how I would respond when he did. That evening, I sat with Anna at our kitchen table and told her I needed a few days alone. I said it quietly, without drama. I told her I wanted to think, to breathe without seeing the yard, the office, or our son's face for a short while. She looked scared at first, asking if I was leaving for good. I said no, not yet. I promised I would be reachable to her, but asked her not to share my exact location with Ethan if he called. I said I needed a space where his voice could not reach me immediately. She hesitated, then nodded. She said she did not like the idea, but she understood. She packed a small bag for me, some clothes, my shaving kit, my old thermos. She slipped a photo of us from early years into a side pocket without saying anything. When I left the apartment, she stood in the doorway and watched me walk down the stairs, like a mother watching a child go to school for the first time. I checked into a cheap business hotel on the edge of the city, the kind of place where the carpets are always a little worn and the windows look out onto parking lots instead of parks. The receptionist barely looked at me, just slid a key card across the counter. In my room, the bed was narrow, the walls plain, the air conditioner humming faintly. But there was something precious there that I had not felt in a long time. Silence without expectations. Nobody knocked. Nobody called my name from the yard. Nobody asked me to sign anything. I turned off my main phone and put it in the bedside drawer. With it off, the world felt strangely far away, like I had stepped behind a glass wall and could watch without being pulled in. On the small desk, I placed a second phone, an older model that only a few people had the number for. Novak, the bank, 1 or 2 suppliers. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the air conditioner and my own breathing. For the first time in many years, there was no urgent list of tasks in my head. There was only the slow, heavy question of what kind of man I wanted to be for the rest of my life. The sky outside darkened gradually, turning the parking lot into a black mirror. I switched off the room light and lay down, not really sleeping, just letting my thoughts circle. Hours passed. Somewhere after midnight, in the soft, humming dark, a sudden small vibration broke the stillness. On the desk, the screen of the backup phone lit up, throwing a pale rectangle of light across the room. Novak's name glowed on it, and the quiet, insistent buzz of that call cut through the silence like a drill touching concrete. When I saw Novak's name on the backup phone, I sat up in the dark like someone had pulled a string in my chest. I let it ring twice before answering because I needed one deep breath to steady my voice. When I picked up, he spoke in his usual calm way, asking if he had woken me. I told him I was not really sleeping anyway. He said he had been thinking after our last meeting and had gone through our file again in detail. He explained that he now understood better what Ethan was trying to do and what it meant for me and Anna. He did not use dramatic words. He simply said that if I wanted to step away, there were clean ways to do it, and if I wanted to protect myself without starting a war, that was also possible. He asked if I was ready to make decisions or if I needed more time. I lay there in the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling in the dim light from the phone screen, and realized that the real question was not about Ethan at all. It was about me. Did I want to spend the rest of my life being slowly pushed into a corner, waiting for the moment my son decided to lock the door? Or did I want to walk out on my own feet while I still could, leaving him with whatever he had grabbed and taking back what he could not see? I told Novak that I was ready. I added that I did not want to destroy the company, did not want to take revenge in the way people imagine when they are angry. I said I wanted distance, respect for myself and for Anna, and a future where we did not live under our son's shadow. He said that was enough for him to work with. The next morning, we met in a small cafe near the hotel. The tables were sticky, the coffee was weak, but it was quiet. Novak laid out the plan not as a list of actions, but as a path. He described what would happen if I stepped out of official roles, what it meant to withdraw my personal guarantees at the bank, what could be done with the building and certain rights without turning everything into a court battle. He spoke about differences between visible control and real control, about how sometimes the person who walks away with less noise ends up with more freedom. He told me that, if handled right, Ethan could keep exactly what he was so eager to claim, along with everything heavy attached to it. I listened and nodded. I did not ask for every technical detail. I trusted this man more than I trusted my own son at that point. We spent that day walking between offices like two ordinary men running dull errands. We sat in a registry lobby where old posters hung crooked on the walls. Novak filled in forms on his clipboard while I waited, my hands folded in my lap. He asked me to sign a few times, always checking I understood the general purpose, stepping down from some roles, clarifying others, adjusting rights that had been sleeping quietly in my name for years. He never read full clauses out loud, and I did not ask him to. The less I replayed each word in my head, the less I would be tempted later to doubt the path I had taken. From there, we went to another building, then another. A clerk looked at my ID, checked something on a screen, and asked me to sign again. In one place, we waited behind a man complaining loudly about interest rates. In another, a young woman wearing headphones stamped papers without really looking at us. The world did not care that I was quietly rearranging the last big pieces of my life. To them, I was just another older man with a slightly shaking hand and a lawyer at his side. Somehow, that made the whole thing feel even more real. Later, in the afternoon, we met briefly with someone from the bank. It was not a dramatic scene. No one raised their voice. Novak did most of the talking, using his calm, dry tone. I answered simple questions about my wishes, about what level of personal responsibility I wanted to carry in the future. I signed a few more times. Marek looked at me with a kind of professional respect I had not seen in my own son's face for a long time. He explained, for the record, how the bank would respond to the changes in my guarantees, what kind of review would follow, what kind of calls Ethan could expect. He did not sound hostile, just factual. Rules are rules. In the evening, back at the hotel, my hand ached slightly from all the signatures, but my mind felt oddly clear. I called Anna from the backup phone, the one Ethan did not know. I told her that I had made some decisions with Novak, that I had stepped away from some things and adjusted others. I did not go into deep detail, but I told her the main point. From now on, we would no longer be the invisible foundation under Ethan's castle. He would stand on his own pillars, whatever they were, without our names holding up the structure. She listened quietly and then said, in a small voice, that as long as we were not left helpless, she trusted me. I told her that we would not be helpless. I would never allow that. After that call, I sat on the hotel bed and thought about how to speak to Ethan one last time before stepping out of his reach. I knew that if I tried to explain everything, we would only fall into arguments, blame, and tears. He would say I was ungrateful for his modernization. I would say he was ungrateful for my foundation. Nothing good would come from that circle, so I decided to leave him with the only thing he truly respected now. A short, clean message that sounded like a business update. I took out my main phone, turned it on for a few minutes, and wrote him an email. I told him that I accepted his decision to remove me from daily control and that I would not contest his changes. I said I needed time away to think about my own future and my health. I mentioned that I had spoken with my lawyer to make sure everything on my side was in order, so he would not need to worry about unfinished matters. I wrote that I wished him success with what he had taken on, and that, from this point, he should consider the company truly his to manage. There was nothing threatening in the message, nothing emotional. It was almost too polite. When I pressed send, I felt a small jolt in my chest. Then I turned the phone off again and put it back in the drawer. Ethan would read those lines in his bright office, probably between two calls, and see exactly what he thought he wanted. A father who had stepped aside without a fight. What he would not see yet were the quiet movements below the surface he had never bothered to learn. The next day, I made only one more visit, this time without Novak. I went back to our old apartment for a few hours. Anna opened the door with swollen eyes, like she had cried at night and then forced herself to stop in the morning. We sat in the kitchen and talked about practical things. We discussed what we could live on, what we could cut, where we could move if we needed to. I told her that we might have to live more modestly, but that whatever we had would be ours, not something handed to us like pocket money. She said she preferred a small, honest life to a comfortable, humiliating one. We also spoke about distance. I asked her if she could imagine living in a different part of the country, or even somewhere else entirely, where Ethan's name did not open or close doors for us. She hesitated, because the idea of leaving familiar streets scared her. But then she said that lately our city had not felt like home either. It had felt like a stage where other people used our story for their own performance. She said that if I believed leaving was the only way to be free without endless fights, she would follow. Before I went back to the hotel, I did something small but important. I took a few personal items from the apartment. Not valuables, not documents. Those were already handled. I took an old photo of Anna and me in front of the first warehouse, a small radio that had played in my office for years, and my worn thermos. I wanted reminders of the life we had built that did not depend on Ethan or on any legal structure. Anna watched me pack them into the same little bag, then hugged me tightly at the door and told me to call when I was ready to come home properly. Back at the hotel, I settled into a strange rhythm. I woke up, did a few simple exercises for my back, ate breakfast in the empty dining room, and then walked short circles around the parking lot, thinking. I did not go to the warehouse. I did not go to the office. I did not call Ethan. On the first day, I kept reaching for my phone out of habit and had to stop myself. On the second day, the urge was weaker. On the third day, I almost forgot the device existed. The world shrank to the size of that small room and my own head. In that quiet, something healed. Not fully, but enough. I thought about my father, who never stepped away from anything until his body forced him to. I thought about how he died, still arguing with people who had already stopped listening. I did not want that to be my ending. I wanted my last big act to be a choice, not an accident. Each day that I stayed away from the yard, I imagined Ethan walking through the office with full control and no real idea what was happening around the edges. I imagined small noises he did not yet understand, calls from the bank, emails from suppliers, small changes in client behavior. On the morning of the fourth day, I woke up before the alarm, with a strange sense that something had finished turning. The room was quiet, the air conditioner humming as always. Sunlight came in sideways through the thin curtains. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, holding my main phone in my hand, feeling its weight. Part of me wanted to throw it into the trash and never speak to anyone again. Another part knew I had to face what had happened in the world while I was gone. I needed to see, with my own eyes, how loud the silence had become on the other side. Finally, I pressed the power button. The screen stayed dark for a second, then lit up with the company logo in a soft vibration. Notifications began to appear almost at once. First 1, then 3, then 8. The counter on the call icon started climbing, skipping numbers as if trying to catch up with itself. 42, 61, 83. It finally stopped at 97 missed calls. The list of names blurred for a moment. Ethan, Lena, the bank, Lena, unknown numbers. I sat there in the hotel bed, the phone warm in my palm, and understood without hearing a single word that my son had finally discovered what it meant to hold everything in his own name when the quiet support he never respected decided to walk away. When I finished staring at the 97 missed calls, the phone buzzed again in my hand. This time it was not Ethan, not Lena, not a number I did not know. It was Novak. I answered. He did not waste words. He told me that the bank had requested an urgent joint meeting with the company that afternoon, that Ethan had sounded shaken on the phone, and that my presence as guarantor and building owner was required. He added that this would probably be the moment when everything became clear to everyone, not just to us. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment after the call ended, feeling how quiet the hotel room was compared to the storm on the other side of town. Then I dressed, took my worn thermos from the table, and left. The bank's boardroom was bright and cold, like the small private room I had visited earlier, only larger and more serious. There was a long table, a screen on the wall, a tray with water glasses nobody touched. Mr. Marek sat near one end with a folder, Novak near the other with his familiar briefcase. A company accountant I barely knew sat with a laptop open, eyes already tired. I took a seat near Novak, not at the head, not at the side, just in a place where I could see everyone. A few minutes later, Ethan and Lena came in. Their usual sharpness was gone. Ethan's tie was slightly crooked. Lena's makeup looked rushed. They both had that look of people who had not slept properly in days. The meeting started with Marek, not with me, not with Ethan. He explained, in his careful, neutral voice, that after receiving formal notice of changes in my personal guarantees and roles, the bank's risk team had reviewed the company's position. He said that large credit lines and overdrafts had been based on my history and assets, not only on company numbers. With my guarantees withdrawn and certain structures changed, the risk profile had shifted sharply. He stated that, according to policy, the bank had frozen some credit lines and placed others under review. He mentioned missed payments, suppliers who had not received funds that week, and payroll deadlines approaching. Each word landed like a slow hammer on the table. Ethan asked, in a strained tone, how this could happen when he owned everything now. Marek answered that ownership on paper did not replace guarantees and securities. He reminded everyone that the bank dealt with contracts, not family stories. He pointed out that the bank had not yet received any new guarantees from Ethan, no new collateral to replace what I had taken back. Until that changed, the bank had to act carefully. The accountant added that some automatic payments had already bounced, that calls from suppliers had started, that one key client had quietly reduced their new orders. Then Novak opened his briefcase. For the first time since this all began, documents were not just hinted at, but placed on the table. He slid one thin stack toward Marek and another toward the accountant. He summarized what they contained. One was my formal resignation from certain company roles, registered and accepted. Another was confirmation that the building the company used as headquarters and main warehouse was, and had always been, owned by my holding company, not by Ethan's new entity. Attached to that was a notice of lease termination with a short grace period, already delivered through proper channels. Novak then mentioned a separate agreement I had signed, not with Ethan's company, but with a client. He explained that Kral Group, while still fulfilling existing obligations with the old company, had signed a new supply contract with a different, smaller firm under my control, one that would gradually take over future orders. He laid that document on the table too. The accountant scrolled frantically on the laptop as figures started to shift in his head. Ethan stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. Slowly, the picture arranged itself in the room. Ethan's entity held the trucks, the newer equipment, the re-registered assets he had grabbed so eagerly. It also held the staff costs, the debts, the obligations, and now the frozen credit lines. The building he operated from, the guarantees that kept the bank calm, and the deepest client loyalty no longer stood under his feet. They stood under mine or had already stepped aside. Lena tried to say that this was unfair, that they had been told everything was already theirs in practice, that the bank could not just change terms. Marek responded that nothing had changed overnight without notice. He said the bank had simply reacted to signed documents, including those Ethan had pushed for and those I had recently chosen. There was a moment when all eyes turned to me, as if waiting for me to fix it, to offer some bridge back to the old comfort. I did not raise my voice. I said that my son had made it very clear he did not trust my methods, that he wanted full control, and that I had respected his wish. I said I had stepped back from guarantees and ownership where I could, leaving him free to stand on his own name just as he wanted. I added that I had no desire to fight for the company or to take anything back from him. What he had moved into his own hands would remain his, together with everything attached. I finished by saying that from this point on, I would not be signing new guarantees, not returning to roles he had already taken from me, and not arguing in family circles about business. I would live quietly with Anna, building whatever small future we could with what was ours. If he wished to speak to me, it would have to be as a man speaking to another man, not as an owner scolding a retired worker. There was no anger in my voice, only finality. Silence spread across the table after that. Lena stared at the lease notice. The accountant stared at his laptop. Marek closed his folder. Novak slipped his documents back into his briefcase with slow, precise motions. Ethan sat there with his hand resting on the table, fingers slightly curled, eyes fixed on the papers that showed him the true shape of what he owned. I stood up, nodded once to Marek and Novak, and walked toward the door. As I stepped into the corridor, the sound of a phone ringing again came from inside the boardroom, sharp and urgent, this time for my son and not for me.